Hi, and welcome to another ArchDaily interview. Today we are talking to Sumayya Vally, Artistic Director of the first Islamic Arts Biennale in Jeddah. Sumayya Vally is a South African architect, founder and director of the Johannesburg-based collaborative architecture studio Counterspace. Designer of the Serpentine Pavilion in 2020, she was the youngest architect to be commissioned this project. Part of Time's 100 emerging leaders who are shaping the future in 2021, Sumayya started her career as a creator and a teacher. Recently, she was appointed as artistic director to the first Islamic Arts Biennale in Jeddah, ongoing until April 2023. So, hi, Sumayya. It's a pleasure to finally talk to you. And let's dive right into the main topic of today's conversation, the Islamic Arts Biennale. So, my first question for you is, how were you first approached to basically help produce this exhibition?
Thanks so much. It's so wonderful to be here. Yes, I was first approached for the project by a cultural strategist who is on the board of the Islamic Arts Biennale. And it was during Ramadan at the time when I was working on the Serpentine Pavilion, and the Serpentine hosted a Zoom discussion. We were in the beginning of the pandemic at that time. And I was speaking with Hans-Ulrich Obrist about renegotiating rituals of community in Ramadan in relation to this time that we were in. And subsequently, there was interest by somebody who heard the interview in me working on the Biennale. So that's how it came about. And it's been an incredible honor to be able to work on it. I don't have a background as a curator. So it's been really interesting, I think, to bring my background as an architect, and especially because of the kind of venue we have and so on. I've really enjoyed thinking about this project really architecturally as well.
And in your opinion, why was it important to create a biennale focused mainly on Islamic arts?
So I initially was very excited to take the project on when I heard that it was called the Islamic Arts Biennale. And I think that there is an inherited definition of Islamic art that comes from 17th century France. And Islamic art has continuously been defined and redefined. And these definitions oscillate around geography, or they're around chronology, or style and aesthetic tradition, but they've never really, they haven't been defined from the inside by us from our perspectives in a way that that connects some of these art forms and forms of artistic expression to our lived experience and to our rituals. And since my practice is so centered and focused on finding design and aesthetic form and artistic expression for our identities, I really believe that it was very important to be able to take a project like this on, to claim and reclaim and configure and reconfigure what this title is for the present and the future. So I see it in a way also as a decolonial project, and I was really excited to be able to define it from these voices and from these perspectives.
And now, what can you tell us about the main themes of the Biennale? Like, how can we define the Qibla and the Hijra? How were these main themes portrayed in the exhibition itself?
Yeah. So this is the first Islamic Arts Biennale, and because of that, I think we had to think about ways for it to have a very broad appeal, and also for it to really kind of set the ground and go back to fundamentals. And the theme for this Biennale is called Awwal Bayt, which means first house. And this is a term of reverence that's given to the Kaaba in Mecca, which is the center and the focus of our rituals. And in the Biennale, we're exploring this idea of first house being the Kaaba, the center of our rituals, but we're also starting to think, what are the first principles of belonging? How do we construct home? What are the principles of first house for our lives? And how is belonging constructed both spiritually and through community? So in the Qibla section, it's very much focused on unpacking of time, and Qibla is the sacred direction that we point towards in prayer. So we're exploring on a variety of scales, starting from the abstract scale of the mind and the vibrational sound of the call to prayer and how it touches our bodies and asks us to turn our attention towards Mecca, to the scale of infinity. So the idea that every time we stand up in prayer, we're connected with people past, present, and future who will do the same. This is explored through the theme of Qibla. And then in the Hijra theme, we're thinking Hijra means migration. And in this theme, we're thinking, what are the first principles of home? What are the first, the building blocks of first house after migration, after displacement? How do we find home and find community through our rituals? How do we share together in loss, in celebration, in prayer, in festival? How do different times of the year bring us together? And this is really the focus of this.
So everything is going back to the first home, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, and we're thinking about first home as where the faith came from, the practices around which it is centered, but we're also thinking about this idea of first home in a more abstract way. So how do we construct home and construct belonging through our rituals, through our faith, and through our rituals of gathering and community?
Very interesting. So the Biennale that opened in January 2023 and it's ongoing until April is taking place in the Western Hajj Terminal at King Abdulaziz Airport in Jeddah, which was initially designed by SOM, and it was one of the winners of the 1983 Aga Khan Award. So what can you tell us about the main setting of the event and what value did it bring to the Biennale?
Absolutely. It's been completely formative in the way that I've thought about the Biennale and also this first theme of Awal Bayt. So when I was first appointed to work on the project, it was the very beginning of this Biennale as a project, and also the Diriyah Biennale Foundation was still in the process of being set up, and in a way has grown immensely alongside the growth of the project. And when we were first looking at sites, we looked at various sites in Jeddah, and when I first visited this site professionally for this project, as one of the potential sites we was considering, I was immediately flooded with memories of being there as a 14-year-old pilgrim and seeing the entire world come together, seeing food from around the world, hearing sounds from around the world, seeing people really gather together to, share food, to lead each other in prayer. And that energy, this idea of a city comprising of the entire world underneath this tented canopy designed by SOM, really was incredibly special for me. I realized that this would be a site that has so much significance in the hearts and the minds of Muslims from the world over. Those people who have been, of course, will remember it as a place that is a key entry point and moment for the beginning of the pilgrim's journey. But even for people who have not been, there is an aspiration or a love towards this idea of the journey and the pilgrimage. And also for people from Jeddah and Mecca and Medina, it's known as the gateway to the Haramain, or the gateway to the holy sites. So I think there was a sense of this profound significance of the site. It is also physically very beautiful. I think one of the reasons that SOM won the Aga Khan Award is because it functions very differently to a conventional airport terminal, in that people are waiting there for many, many hours on end, different to another airport. They're not, they're not being encouraged to spend all their money or go shopping. They really are there as a gathering and as a community. And this is seen as a very important step and moment in the pilgrim's journey. So that became incredibly formative, and especially for the theme of the themes of Qibla and Hijra, on the one hand, reflecting on the centrality of this region in Muslim practice everywhere, and also this idea that this place has always been synonymous with migrations and movement of people from medieval times, with the historic pilgrims roads constructed, to contemporary mega infrastructures of the pilgrimage. It has really come to function as a nexus of cultural production by virtue of the fact that it is such a cultural melting pot, that so many people have always passed through it, and it has absorbed the culture of the entire world inside of it, and it's transmitted its own culture to the world. So that, is the center of thinking about the theme of hijrah, and it's also expressed in many of the artworks.
Well, the scenography was also designed by OMA, another big name also in the architectural field. How did it transform the space, and how did it contribute to the general vision of the Biennale and of you also as an artistic director?
So as artistic director, I was really excited to appoint and select OMA for the scenography of the Biennale. I think we wanted to think about somebody who'd be able to work at the scale, because the scale of the project is a kind of mega scale project. But I also really wanted to subvert the idea of a white cube space. I didn't want to have a white cube scenography. And this space is incredibly charged with significance. It has an energy of thousands of people who have moved through it. As I said, it's tied to aspiration in such a deep way. And I wanted to be able to have a scenography that is very atmospheric and is able to express the different atmospheres of ritual, of prayer, and also of gathering and community. And I wanted to be able to work with designers who would understand this. So when I started to work with OMA, we had a lot of discussions about the shift in atmosphere from space to space and sub-theme to sub-theme. And in the Qibla section, we have a very atmospheric, very meditative journey that moves from darkness into golden light and then ends in an explosion of light, where we encounter this idea of infinity and the central moment of our rituals, the Kaaba in Mecca. And in the outdoor area, really, the scenography was driven by what we described when we talked about my own journey of first being there as a pilgrim and seeing the entire world come together. We wanted to be able to create a place that would function as a gathering place. And also somehow we needed to be able to manage the scale, because we have this infinity of canopy structures, but we wanted to also create encounters that would be more intimate within the landscape. And OMA really took that challenge on, because the scenography that we've created, on the one hand, celebrates the canopy structure. Every time we look up, we're able to see it. But at the same time, there are intimate moments created. And a part of my legacy for this Biennale, I guess, is that our outdoor scenography will be permanent, and it will form the basis for the next artistic director and curators to play with and input their scenography on top of that.
Would the next Islamic Arts Biennale also happen in the same location?
Yes, okay. It will. So now that the project is up and running, we have constructed a series of buildings, and the Biennale itself, our Biennale, takes place. The Qibla section is in 4 galleries, and there's a 5th gallery called the Al-Madar, which is an initiative by the Diriyah Biennale Foundation that functions as a community of institutions. So we invited institutions from around the world, as far as Mali, Uzbekistan, really the world over, to contribute something on the theme of Awal Bayt from their perspective. And then we also have a building that is dedicated to public programs. We have a reception area. There are cafes and restaurants, and there's also the outdoor landscape area, which is essentially a set of outdoor galleries. It's going to be for outdoor artworks forever, and it's also going to host both permanent and temporary installations. So the idea is that this site will now really become a home for the future of the Islamic Arts Biennale. And a center for the arts, really. I think when the Biennale is not on, the idea is that it will be a place for arts and culture and exchanges across the year.
Interesting to note. So it's not going to be only functional when there is a Biennale. So it's going to be basically functional all year long with artistic activities, I would say.
Yes, that's right.
Oh, nice. So let's talk about architects that contributed to this Biennale. Who are they, basically? Who are the architects exhibiting in this Arts Biennale? And what are their main backgrounds? And what are some of their key interventions?
We have a huge amount of architectural participation in this Biennale. And for me, it's been very important that we also blur distinctions between what is contemporary and what is historic, what is treated as the traditional archive and what is seen as an evolving archive of practice, and also distinctions between art, craft, design, and architecture have blurred and are merged. Also, a lot of practicing artists in the region have a background in architecture and design because that's what was available to them to study for the most part. And I think we also really wanted to accept this diversity of practice as a very important showcase of a diversity of voices and a diversity of practice. So throughout the Biennale, most of the experiences, because they're so large scale, are very architectural. And we've invited architects to contribute on a number of themes, both in the Qibla and the Hijra section. The project that you have featured by Left Architects is actually by a collective of practitioners from Tunisia. And in that work, they're reflecting on the island of Jerba. It's within the section that is about the ablution rituals that we perform with water. But I also wanted to extend the idea of water beyond the body and the limbs to thinking about how our bodies are connected to ecologies and so on. And so this work is about the island of Jerba, a place that is very resource scarce and has also and is yet surrounded by water, but it's also changed religious ownership over the course of its life. And one of the reasons it was able to maintain political and community autonomy is that every family had a mosque and they took care of this mosque. And so we find that there's a very lateral political system because everybody is taking care of a piece of the land. And one thing to mention about that project in particular is that there is a huge body of archival work that is a part of the project, and the architects have shown us a selection of that in the Biennale, and then an immersive interpreted installation from their archival research. And like that, there are many works in the Biennale by architects where they have actually worked to create an archive from fragments of information or from oral bodies of knowledge. So Nasser Salim, for example, who is trained as a traditional calligrapher in the Holy Mosque of Mecca, but is also an architect and a contemporary artist, has worked with the archives surrounding the footprint of the Kaaba in Mecca. And this is a place that we believe has always been sacred. It has a pre-Islamic history. It was first built, we believe, by Abraham. It was a place that was used for pagan and idol worship. And it was rebuilt several times. And what we see in Nasser's work, where he's marked out the footprint of the Kaaba as it shifted in calligraphic letters that describe the measurements. So, for example, X amount of shoulder widths or X amount of hand widths. We see that although the footprint shifted slightly, the core has been always almost the same. So this idea that it's been a place that is eternally sacred, the idea of the infinitely sacred really comes through. Noura Sayah, who's an artist from Bahrain, she's Palestinian. She's worked with the Friday sermons from Mecca and Medina, and in particular those who mention the Al-Aqsa Mosque as well, because she was working with bringing Al-Aqsa back into the realm of the three sacred mosques. She believes that it's been politicized in recent years, and she's asking us to also reflect on and remember that this place is sacred for all Muslims. And they didn't necessarily manifest in the Biennale, but a big part of the work that she did was also to find archival Friday sermons from the Holy Mosque in Al-Aqsa. And I really understood that in parallel to the Biennale project, there was this archive project that was happening, and the importance of a platform like this in being able to construct and shape and preserve archives that are being lost is also very important to mention. In the same way, Dima Sruji's work, Maintaining the Sacred, that's also an archival study of windows of the Al-Aqsa Mosque that have been destroyed over the years. She's worked to study them, and then she's created an interpretation of them with stonemasons and glass blowers from Palestine. And then we have work by Studio Bound and Brick Lab, both architects from Jeddah, and again, both thinking deeply about archives of place. So Studio Bound's work, they have over the years documented small kind of hole-in-the-wall mosques in Mecca that people have given over as an act of community and generosity as part of the boundary of the Holy Mosque. So for example, a room in someone's shop or a room in their home, during the time of prayer, that function is suspended and it becomes a part of the mosque. And they've paid homage to these mosques by documenting the prayer carpets from each of them and then marking them out within an installation that describes the sacred landscape of Mecca. And many of these mosques have been destroyed. So it's also, over the years they've disappeared. So it's also an homage to these everyday places of worship that people have taken care of for themselves, by themselves, and as a contribution for their community. Brick Lab's work focuses on the Air Pilgrims accommodation, which is currently being demolished in Jeddah and has a long history of being an important place where pilgrims came to stay when they first arrived in Jeddah. Of course, now we don't travel in the same ways. We have access to travel that is a lot faster, and people are not spending as much time in Jeddah as pilgrims. But this building famously was a place where people from around the world would stay together in the same building. It functioned almost like a city in the building with people from around the world. Malcolm X famously stayed in the building and wrote postcards from there about the influence that it had on his politics, because he saw people from around the world really come together as equals. And they have worked to recreate a fragment of the building, and within it they've constructed an archive with objects and artifacts from the building that tell the story of the life of this building. And also during the Biennale, that we're going to host activations that focus on traders from around Jeddah. Some of them who have been displaced over time or who have, stopped or had to stop particular forms of trade. And this is because this building had a very active life as a place of trade and as a place of exchange. There are stories about people from, for example, Afghanistan selling carpets outside the building. It's a place where people of Jeddah and Mecca really came to welcome people who were coming from all over the world. And just by virtue of the fact that it had so many people from around the world, it was an engine for cultural production. Scene Architects are a collective of young women from Riyadh, and their work is focused on Najdi architecture and on thinking about how we preserve and learn from these vernacular traditions. And they have created a space that is a reflection of the Prophet's first space of prayer, which is a structure that touches the earth very lightly. It had no domes, arabesques, it didn't have a minaret. It was just made of palm fronds, and they disintegrated into the ground entirely. And so they've created this space, and it functions as a performance work. At 5 times a day, the space is raked with fresh lines in the sand. And when the palm fronds disintegrate, we will also replace them. And it's also during the month of Ramadan going to host a series of activities, the recitation of the Quran, majlis or salon gatherings, also shura discussion gatherings. And the idea with most of our outdoor artworks is really that they are generous invitations for people to come together and gather. The artists have been incredibly generous in that they have constructed them so that they become invitations for other artists to participate. Civil architecture has created a sundial that reflects on past climatic events and also moments during the life of the Biennale that have significance for gatherings. So, for example, there is one that takes the form of an iftar table and that a fast break table, and that is about the idea of coming together to break the fast. There are several dials, each of them have a different function and interpret a different theme. And we have been hosting performances with other artists who are reflecting on the themes related to this project. So those around harvest or the rising and setting sun, and how our lives and our prayers are really ordered by these movements, these celestial movements that are beyond us. So the artist Muhammad Faraj created a performance in the opening week called Dreaming of a Sea of Rice, that is about the harvest from his hometown in Hassa, which is in rural Saudi Arabia. And like that, we're hosting a series of performances in that space as well. Yasmin Lari has created a prototype for a reassembled mosque. And she's created this with a system that she's prototyped. So it's made entirely of bamboo. And this is a prototype that she made for areas of earth flood. And she's thinking about this idea of touching the earth lightly and of a model that is assembled and reassembled. Her ambition is that this prototype will travel across schools in the Gulf as a pedagogical tool as well.
It's impressive to hear so many names from the region like contributing.
Yes, thank you. There are many more architects as well. Out of the interview, we'll look at all of them and send you information about everything.
Okay, so other than your recent work with the Islamic Arts Biennale, this is the year of the Venice Architecture Biennale. Basically, when you started in 2014, you had the position of assistant curator and film producer for the South African Pavilion at La Biennale di Venezia. And in 2023, you are one of the invited architects with your firm Counterspace to exhibit in the Central Pavilion in the Giardini. So what can you tell us about your contribution to the Venice Biennale, even if it's abstract? And just to finish, how relevant are architectural exhibitions and Biennale nowadays?
Thank you. I'm incredibly excited about the theme for the 2023 Venice Architecture Biennale. Professor Leslie Loco is also someone who has been formative in my own career. I was very lucky to be able to teach at the school she started in Johannesburg, the Graduate School of Architecture, where we were really working towards creating a curriculum for and of the African continent. And I'm incredibly honored to be in this cohort of architects that she's working with for the Biennale. The project that we're working on is called the African Post Office. And I invited the architect, artist, curator, Muad Misbahi, who is also African, to work on the project with me. And we are creating an installation that is about bringing different territories into being through performance and through sound and through activation. we're also reflecting on this idea of exchange and the architecture of the post, which has a long history in many African typologies as the totemic post, or the thing that orders rituals. Also in many Islamic traditions, there is the idea of a gathering that is convened around a niche that points towards Makkah, for example, or the minaret that calls the call to prayer. So we're thinking about the post as an elemental form that really calls a gathering, and the installation is going to reflect on this idea.
I can't wait to see it. And so, as like my final question was, how relevant do you think architecture exhibitions and biennales are nowadays? Like you're just almost finished, let's say, the Islamic Arts Biennale. You're contributing now to the Venice Biennale. You have done so many work around the world in architecture exhibitions. So,
Yeah,
how do you perceive them?
I really believe that biennales, pavilions, platforms for experimental art and architecture are very important in that they are platforms for making the future. I think perhaps that broadly the model of a biennale perhaps has not been is underutilized. It's not been utilized as productively and as generatively as it could be in many ways. And that's why, as I mentioned, I was very excited to artistically direct the first Islamic Arts Biennale, because there is no platform that we currently have for imagining a future for Islamic art, one that honors historic tradition and historic archaeological finds, but also that imagines a future and a creative output that is inspired by our faith, by belief systems that come from elsewhere, by voices and perspectives from outside of the mainstream. So I think platforms like this are incredibly important. When I worked on the Serpentine Pavilion, it also allowed me to create a series of legacy projects. And even though the pavilion no longer exists, some of the fragments that the Serpentine Pavilion was placed in, I still have active collaborations with many of these community arts institutions. I recently worked with the artist Alvaro Barrington on a pavilion for the Notting Hill Carnival, and that was a fragment of the Serpentine Pavilion and also a kind of homage to the collaboration that we created with the Tabernacle in Notting Hill. We also created a radio station in Barking and Dagenham, building on the Serpentine's Radio Ballads project, which has been ongoing for 10 years, and really worked, I think, with the platform of the pavilion to honor and recognize the work that's been done by the Serpentine and by the civic curator Amal Khalaf in working with civic and community. And as I said, even though the pavilion is not there, these projects are still present, and they're part of the reason that I was able to and have moved to London or have an arm of my practice here. We also created the project Support Structures for Support Structures through the pavilion, which is an initiative that honors and supports artists working at the intersections of art and social justice, art and ecology, and art and the archive. And this is a kind of network for people to collaborate. There is a fund attached to it as well. And it's something that came out of my research and thinking for the pavilion, but that has a life beyond it. So I really believe that these platforms, so temporary, can spark projects beyond them. And also we can put forth experimental models that ask us to question the future of architectural practice. And that's incredibly important, especially given that the model of architectural practice that we have is so fraught and so problematic and so inherited. I think we need, in fact, many, many more platforms where we can test and engage with new ideas.
Thank you, Sumayya, for this beautiful conversation and for all this information that you shared with us. Would you like to add anything else?
No, thank you so much for having me. It's been such an honor. And it's such a privilege to finally meet you. I'm very much looking forward to welcoming you for the Biennale.